HALy is an imaginary robot named after two famous computers. HAL, the star of Arthur C. Clarke's wonderful movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, and HALy, the star of YouTube Go. Whereas HAL was made of imaginary electronics, HALy is made of real-life flesh and bone. But I'm not being rude to call her a computer, because all human beings, and indeed all living things, from big sperm whales to little you and me, and even the tiny bacteria in our bodies, are computers, living computers. Every cell in your body is a miniature computer made out of what Dennis Bray calls wetware, because the computational machinery of life, made of plastics like proteins, lives in the watery insides of biological cells. HALy's logic is based on what HALy tells us about when she's playing Go. HALy tries to imagine in its own head the mental images that HALy talks about when she's playing. It does this by expressing HALy's commentaries in the form of symbolic syllogisms, rules that one day a clever computer programmer might be able to turn into computer software, so HALy could take the big step from fiction to fact. Let's look at some of HALy's syllogisms. Oh, by the way, if HALy were ever able to play a whole game of Go, it would need thousands, possibly millions of such rules. But so far I've only thought of a few of them. Here's one derived from HALy's explanations in the previous episode of this series. If A, I want to play in an empty corner, and B, the opponent has some strong stones facing the empty corner on one of the sides next to it, then C, look for a jiseki that won't give the op a complementary position between its outcome and what he has already on that side. This rule is a generalization of the situation HALy talked about when she was considering her second move in episode 3. In that example, she was thinking of where to play in the lower left corner when the lower right corner was occupied by a single op stone on the Hoshi point. HALy can see straight away whether a corner is empty or not, but how about some of the other qualities in the rule, like strong, or facing, or complementary? These need to be worked out, to be thought through. Facing is a simple quality to determine. To keep the explanation simple, let's pretend we are white and op is black. So if the nearest stone along the side is black, it's facing us. Here are some examples of groups that face towards the lower left, and some examples of groups that don't. This one does face left, but you'd hardly call the black stone strong, as it is overshadowed and will have a hard time living. Remember, the syllogism only applies to strong stones facing the empty corner. So we need to find a way to work out whether stones are strong or not. And right away we are plunged into the forest of complexity, because whether or not the stone is strong depends on whether or not it will live. Tsume go at the very beginning of Fuseki. How to solve a tricky problem? Well, there are basically two approaches. You can either work hard or you can work smart. In Go, working hard means reading it all out, or as much of it as you can. It's the basic strategy used by Monte Carlo search, which operates a bit like a whirling dervish, flailing around in all directions and relying on a relatively simplistic evaluation function that can at least identify big swings at the end of long sequences, and a prodigious mental energy to read out millions of such sequences. It's a kind of brute force search, which, although not exhaustive, is extensive enough to make it hard for its op to predict what it's going to do next. Monte Carlo players often make bizarre moves that are strikingly dumb, but occasionally impressively tricky. The technique has taken the best of them high up in the amateur ranks, far higher than I ever imagined possible 40 years ago, which only serves to demonstrate yet again that us mere mortals are maybe not as smart as we fondly like to imagine we are. In contrast, working smart means standing on the shoulders of the armies of great players who have gone before you, and by trial and error over the centuries have worked out some general principles that usually work. AI people, that's people who study artificial intelligence, not people who look like monkeys, call such principles heuristics, a Greek word meaning rule of thumb. We use heuristics in our daily lives all the time, and it's possible that using heuristics is the very essence of intelligence. For example, one heuristic used by magicians, footballers, fencers, rugby players, and kangaroos is the feint. The feint is a brief movement in one direction, immediately followed by a sharp turn and a dodge in the other direction in order to avoid an onrushing predator. It works because the attacker, or audience member of a magic show, has a brain which, like the brain of the common housefly, is programmed to detect movement and to imagine, as stock market players all too often imagine, that if something starts going in one direction, it will continue to go on in that same direction. This one-dimensional way of thinking is the most childish kind of mathematical reasoning called linear extrapolation. It's the reasoning that led Roger Penrose to imagine that a collapsing star would continue to collapse until it occupied no space at all, at which time its density would be infinite. Now that's what I call heuristic oversimplification. But if Penrose's idea wasn't naive enough, his protege Stephen Hawking took another 7-league boot stride along Penrose's one-dimensional linear extrapolation mindset and hypothesized that because the whole universe seems to be expanding right now, it must have always been expanding, and therefore it must have started from a singular point of infinite density, just as Catholic priest Georges Lemaitre said it had ages and ages ago. All because Edwin Hubble had seen through his telescope that the further stars are away from us, the redder they are, so it looks like they're moving away from us by the Doppler effect, and the further away they are, the faster they're going away. Well, the trouble with smart people like Penrose and Hawking is that when they get a silly idea in their heads, they're inclined to believe themselves because they're smart, and because they're smart, we believe them too. Sorry, I'm getting off the point a bit here. I was talking about the feint heuristic, so let's get back to that. Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi are modern masters of the feint on the football field, and they learned their dancing skills by following in the footsteps of great dribblers of the past, like George Best and Zinedine Zidane. Kangaroos are masters of the feint too, which presumably they learned through evolution, and it helps them escape dingo attacks. But unfortunately for the kangaroos, there's a new animal on the block that is much more dangerous to them than the dingo. It's the motor car. Motor car drivers don't have brains like dingoes, so they swerve to avoid a kangaroo that hops into the road, or maybe is sleeping on it because the road's nice and warm, warmer than the soil of the desert at night. So the motor car driver swerves in the opposite direction to the way the kangaroo's going, but the kangaroo's fainting. The motor car driver doesn't want to kill the kangaroo, so he swerves away from the way the kangaroo's going. But then the kangaroo can't help itself and it applies its feint, quickly turns around and hops the other way, and the car crashes straight into it. So the best way to avoid hitting a kangaroo on the road at night is to aim straight at it, and it'll dodge out of your way. The feint doesn't work for kangaroos, but it has worked up to now, despite all the evidence to the contrary, for the terrorists who faked the video footage in 2001 to throw us off their scent. The feint is useful in Go too, in the form of a sacrifice move, which attracts the attention of the opponent. So whilst he's busy capturing it, you can build strength on the other direction for use later on. The crosscut is an example of the feint, which encourages the op to busy himself on one side whilst you build some shape on the other side, making it a useful tactic for invading a moyo. HALy's basic strategy is KISS, which stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. So when it comes to assessing the strength of stones, HALy uses a simple, smart heuristic instead of doing the hard work of trying to read it all out right up to the end, which would take longer than the universe has left if it keeps going the way Hawking reckons it is. Oh, sorry, time is up. It takes so long for Telstra to upload stuff that I have to do it in little bits, so I'll tell you about HALy's strength heuristic in the next episode. Have a nice day.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, we're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Hal? 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 Hal?